Okay, welcome back to day 2 of our Metaverse Conference. I think we've had a great time yesterday with some really interesting talks, and we're absolutely going to continue. So it's my privilege to introduce the keynote today. Oh, are you still fiddling, or? Oh, we're still okay. Okay, good. I mean, I can talk blather on for ages if we need to. So, Yvonne Rogers is a legend in the field, and she has contributed to many diverse aspects of interaction design. In fact, we could easily claim that she has made some of the biggest contributions in the world to interaction design by having co-authored the definitive textbook on the area. She is Professor of Interaction Design and Director of the UCLIC, the UCL Interaction Centre at University College London, which is a fantastic interdisciplinary institute that brings together psychologists, computer scientists, and many other people to work on issues around human-computer interaction, interaction design, etc. And Yvonne herself is a psychologist by training and has since worked on many aspects of interaction design. I think on the website it was described as improving people's lives by augmenting everyday work and enjoyment factors, which is, incredibly broad and represents the breadth of her work. But today, I believe she's going to talk about, how we apply such methods of HCI and the work to AI and VR, which is, of course, the topic of this conference. So I'll hand over to
Maybe I should sit down because you all look so comfortable and I would be towering over you. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I would like to thank Mel for inviting me here. I gave a talk 2 months ago in Barcelona, and on the basis of that, or maybe some other stuff that was mentioned, I was invited to come here. My research isn't in virtual environments or the metaverse per se, but I have had PhD students working in VR, and the next, hang on a minute. So I will talk a bit about the research that we've done in VR, but I will be more generally talking about what's happening in the world, which is Gen AI revolution, and what it means for us in terms of how we carry out our tasks, because it's transforming knowledge tasks. And in particular, I'll talk about, what the implications are for this in terms of should we make more or less cognitive effort when we do our work. I'll then talk about my framework that I've been developing for augmenting cognition, and this is through thinking about using mechanisms of scaffolding, extending how we do things and externalizing. And I'll talk about the work that I've done over the last few years with chatbots and large language models to engender reflection. And then I'll talk about the work that we've done on using VR to explore positive and negative emotions and encourage conflict resolution. And then finally, where AI can meet VR in the metaverse. So much of the driving force behind the development of software generally has been to help users perform their computing tasks more rapidly, more efficiently and more automatically. And we see this trend over the last 30, 40 years. And we see, project management tools like this one, where it's all about providing you with ways to do things much faster, such that you can be guaranteed to save 1 day a week if you use their software. And this is very much what is driving software designers and engineers. An example of a user interface that's been incredibly successful is the use of filters. where you can select various options, and that allows you to explore very rapidly, very quickly, different things. For example, here, or Tableau, or financial forecasting, you just have to go tick, 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 and it will select those options, and then you can see what the predictions will be. This push for speed and efficiency is continued with the advent of AI tools in the last 10 years, and we see that with automatic translation, virtual personal assistants, image recognition, medical diagnosis, fraud detection. It's all about making it faster for us, and so we can do more of it and more efficiently. And it's no surprise that generative AI has followed in the footsteps of machine learning and deep learning. It's that ChatGPT and all the other tools that have proliferated in the last 2 years can now do all manner of knowledge-based tasks previously done by humans, for better or for worse. You can produce code, write essays, blogs, content, reports, and with Notebook LM last November came out and summarizing key points from meetings and producing podcasts. And as we heard yesterday, we can now have human-like conversations with the LLMs in various guises, and it will answer questions as if it is a human. We saw with the virtual therapist, but there are lots of other types that are being developed as human-like. And also it can create various content like websites, video, novels, and art. So it has proliferated and diversified in what it can do. And the outcomes, why are we all so excited, why do we all get worried, is that it can save time and increase productivity, and that means we might lose our jobs and so on. So there's always a pro and a con. But I think this move towards knowledge tasks means that lots of the digital drudgery that is involved with the blank page and so on and so forth is being reduced. We can get over these and we can reduce the effort needed. So what next? What's going to happen in the next few years? Will we let the AI tools, the Gen AI tools, do ever more of our knowledge tasks? And, people might say, well, why not? It reduces the cognitive effort we have to make. It means we can go and be more creative, do other things, go down the beach, or so on and so forth. But my argument is, let's maybe think differently about what we could do with AI, rather than just reducing and speeding up. And this brings me to what's called the paradox of effort. And in neuroscience and psychology, there's been a lot of theories developed to talk about how much effort there is and how costly it can be. So when given a choice, whether it's humans or non-humans, we often seek ways to reduce that effort to conduct a task. So for humans, using ChatGPT to summarize a report for us, to write an essay, it's much less effort than doing it ourselves. So we tend to take that choice. 98% of students in the last report have and are still using ChatGPT to write their essays in one form or another. So there's an example of some ways in which the younger generations are using them. But, this is the big but, if we make the effort, if we make more effort to do a task yourself, it can be more rewarding. So yes, you can get away with getting someone else to do it for you, but it's not rewarding. So if we write an essay ourselves, if we write a wedding speech, for example, that's original funny, you get more satisfaction. And students who don't use, the 2% who don't use ChatGPT, find it more rewarding because they have done it by themselves. So this raises the question, clearly there are many benefits from these tools, but when do we design the AI tools to reduce human effort? And what if we design them to increase the human effort? Has anyone really thought about what that would mean? And why would you want to do that? So to reduce cognitive effort, this is what we're all familiar with, is when a task is perceived by the person to be arduous, to be tedious and formulaic, such as writing a letter, or summarizing key points in a consultation meeting. Or just today I saw an advert for when someone's leaving, there's a leaving card. You don't know what to write, and it will tell you what to write for that person. You just click some keywords and it will come up with something that looks original. And that makes our life so much easier. So using Gen AI to do that task, the important thing here is the user no longer tells the computer what to do. We normally would tell the computer, we select options, but we tell it what the outcome we want. We would like it to be like this or like that. And this significantly reduces the cognitive effort previously needed. But what it does mean is we need more metacognitive effort. And by this, I mean we have to plan how to execute the task. And this means doing something we haven't done before, which is to write prompts. And there's a lot of research into prompt engineering about what's the best way to write prompts. How do we teach people? And that's a different type of skill, a different type of effort than what we've done before. So what about increasing cognitive effort? This might, for some people, feel perverse, but I think it's actually something that has not been researched much in what I'm doing and my team is doing, looking at this. So we're just thinking about how to design generative AI tools to get people to expend more effort by asking them to do things. For example, we can get students to critique the outputs of AI tools against their goals and their expectations, to see if it's any good, to see how they could improve it. We can get them to reflect more on what they are doing themselves through using these tools to get them to externalize their thoughts. And we can get them to change how they think and make decisions so that they may be more systematic and less prone to bias. So there's ways in which we can get the human to do more, to make more cognitive effort, to do these kinds of tasks. But it will only work if the person appreciates that making more effort in this way leads to better learning, more engagement, more fulfillment, and that the extra effort in doing this is more rewarding in its own right. And this is the trick. How do we do that? There's a lot been written about what's called the IKEA effect. Those of you from Sweden, I know there's someone here from Sweden, although they are worldwide, is that if you get a flat pack and you make the table yourself rather than buying it from a store, you feel it's much more rewarding, more fulfilling, and you actually love it more if you make it. And it's become known as the IKEA effect, or IKEA, depending where you come from. So my approach is to think about how we can develop these tools to augment human cognition. So instead of designing software to speed up what we do, let's consider slowing down what we do. And instead of trying to decrease the effort, the cognitive effort involved, what would happen if we try to increase it? And this is where this idea of thinking tools comes into being. We want to develop new kinds of tech thinking tools that can expand our minds, that can open up our minds to new ideas and new ways of thinking, new perspectives, that can help us become more aware of our minds and even can externalize our thoughts and emotions. And so trying to think of designing these tools to do different things rather than doing the things we currently do faster and more efficiently. And I've been inspired by lots of theories, but one in particular, and I'm sure many of you have read this, is Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And this was a bestseller in 2011. Daniel Kahneman lived to the ripe old age of 90 and died last year. But he talked a lot about this idea of having two systems, System 1 and System 2 thinking. And this helped him in his theories about how we make decisions. So he says System 1 is the one that we tend to use or intuitively and with little effort, and it's automatic. When we confront a situation, that's the one that kicks in. And it routinely guides our thoughts and actions, and is often right. But sometimes it's prone to these biases and errors of judgment. System 2, on the other hand, is a voice of reason, something that takes over at times when needed, is more deliberate, more effortful, more orderly, and slower. And he says that we flip between these two systems. But it's to remember that this is a very simple model, it's metaphorical, but for me this is quite good because it helps me to think about how to use it to inform design. So it's not how the mind works, but it's thinking a bit about how we can model how the mind works. And models are useful for informing design. So I've developed what I call the C framework, which is to think about how we can develop software that allows us to scaffold our thinking, extend our thinking, and externalize our thinking. And by scaffolding, I'm referring to how we can develop structures in place to guide how we learn to make more systematic decisions. and by extending to construct these structures to broaden our reasoning in various ways, and then thirdly, to externalize our thinking, so our inner thoughts and ideas that can be half-baked, provide ways to represent these and to solve them and to put them in place. So these aren't mutually exclusive, they overlap, but there are ways of different lenses, if you like, to think about how we design new tools. So part of my early research was to look at how we might help with decision making. And my PhD student at the time was very interested in investing, Leon Reichertz. And so we spent some time thinking about how we might help people make better decisions when investing. During the pandemic and afterwards, there was a huge uptake of trading apps. There are hundreds of trading apps that you can download now to invest your money in. And lots of novices have downloaded these and are lured into putting money into them. Over 130 million people use them in 2024. And you can see the growth of them in the graph to the right. But many people have made many costly mistakes because they're not familiar with what's involved in investing, particularly novices. So we were thinking, well, how can we help them to think better, to scaffold their thinking such that they don't make rash decisions and get themselves into all sorts of trouble and waste or spend a lot of money. And so this is an example of what does a novice investor do when they see this on their phone. So for 2 weeks or so, it's going like this, and then it goes up. You think, oh, great, I'm making all this money, and then suddenly it goes, Ch. This happened, I think, recently with what was going on in the US with those tariffs and things like that. Anyway, what people tend to do is panic when you see that. They get very emotional, and they may sell too fast, too much, too fast, and regret it later. They don't have a good strategy to deal with the situation. And so, whereas professional investors have spent time developing techniques, they have the voice of reason, and they have a set of questions and criteria they use before finalizing their decisions. Beginners, novices don't. They just make rash decisions. They jump to a conclusion. They don't question their intuition, and it's very difficult for them to do so under stress. So what we did at the time, this was before Gen AI and large language models came along, was developed a chatbot that would help scaffold novices' thinking. And the idea was that it would probe novices at opportune times to get them to rationalize or to think about their intentions and to think about what they're doing and why, and in doing so, hopefully stop them acting impulsively, and to encourage a sort of interior monologue. I don't know if you have that when you're making a big decision, but you go through the various things. You might write down on a list. That's a form of externalizing it. But we want to help them to work through their hunches that may be poorly formulated. And things like, how does this compare with your previous choice? Have you considered criteria X? They're very open-ended questions. And so this idea was to probe them and to get them to learn to develop new strategies. So this was our software prototype. It's called TradeBot, and you can see in the middle there, that's the chatbot that would appear. And the software prototype, or the simulator, is similar to some of the apps that were around at the time, where you've got a list of the stocks that you're interested in investing in, and then you can click on how the trends, how they've done over the years, and then you've got your portfolio there. And so the way in which this works is the user will click and find out information about the particular stock they're interested in selling or buying, and then they must think, right, I'm going to sell this or I'm going to buy this. And then the trade bot will kick in and say, are you sure? And then it will say, what's your investment hypothesis? Getting them to think about it before they just make that decision. And then it requires the user to type into that chatbot, and then they having done that form of reflection, they can then make the trade or not. So the rationale behind this chatbot is to promote short interactions. The user, so in order to get the user to stop, to think and reflect. And secondly, that the trading tool, the chatbot is embedded in the trading tool so that they can quickly dovetail between task execution and thinking what they're doing. So those were the two key design principles behind the design of this. So how effective was this first approach embedding a chatbot into a software prototype like that. So we ran a user study, presented various participants with no or some experience with investing, and gave them particular scenarios. I'm not going to go into detail because I've got a number of case studies I want to get through, where they had to make investing decisions. They had to buy or sell a stock and think aloud in depth. And afterwards, we did in-depth interviews. And our key findings, which are published in II conference proceedings, was that it made them reevaluate their thoughts. It drew attention to things that they might have overlooked or not even considered. But at the same time, did we get it right? Was it too much? Was it, this chatbot keep appearing? And some of them thought that sometimes the agent was too pushy. So, for example, it said it's a little bit intrusive. It's something I think you could get used to if you make it almost part of the investment decision-making process. And using it for longer periods, they suggested, well, I know what it's going to say because I've used it for months now, and I know its nature. So it's almost like sometimes you just don't want to hear it. I'm going to trade this regardless. So sometimes it can be too much. You need to get the sweet spot for where probing can be effective. So we followed on this study, which was at the Advent, with thinking of extending thinking by using large language models. So before, this was just a chatbot that was scripted by us. We had a number of open-ended questions that would be sent to the user. In this one, we used a large language model to help investors reason about their intentions. And this required more cognitive effort for them to use. And our aim here was to ask the participants to describe the rationale behind each of their decisions and for the AI to augment them. And I'll show you how it works and how it was different from the last tool, which is, does it encourage more informed reasoning or does it get in the way of their investing? So this is a similar trading platform we had but this time we had the large language model embedded in the right-hand corner over there, and it was called the Investing Assistant. And the way in which it worked was the user would type in their reasoning, and they have to say why they've chosen, what's their intentions, what's their goals. So it would say something like, my portfolio allocation rationale is for Samsung is 10%. And to say why, select for its emphasis on natural resources sectors, suggesting resilience and growth. And then the user could click Get Feedback. And this is where the large language model would read what's been typed in, and then summarize, and then give some feedback. So it would say, your initial portfolio leans heavily towards sectors with high growth potential, blah, 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 blah. And then it would say, why not, for company Y, increase your investment, because it could enhance your portfolio's geographical diversification. How about moving from 10% to 13%? So it takes what the user typed in, summarizes it, and then makes a suggestion. And they have to do that for each of their investments. We had another condition, which was just get a recommendation from the large language model. No user input. So it would suggest, invest a large amount of your portfolio into this for stability and growth, blah, 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 blah. So we conducted a comparative study where we compared 3 conditions, the baseline with no AI, with recommend, where the system just recommends, and then this augmentation where the user has to do a bit of effort by writing the rationale and why they've chosen this particular portfolio of shares, and then the large language module will augment that. I won't go through the details here, but this is a description of the study where we compared the different conditions and the outcomes from each of these. But just to say that for the 2 conditions, there was not one clear winner. There are different benefits and for each of the 2 conditions. So with the recommend AI condition, half the participants preferred the specific recommendation it made. And the reason for this is it made suggestions that they might not have thought about. And they found it, as we suggested, less cognitively demanding to use. But it was black box, it came from nowhere, and that was not helpful for some of the users. With the augment AI condition, where they had to write their rationale themselves and then get feedback, it gave the participants more freedom to think for themselves. It helped them fill in the gaps in their thinking, and it confirmed whether they had the right thoughts. So it gave them control and autonomy and agency and supporting how they're thinking and how to decide. So going back to my initial idea of this, when to support less or more cognitive effort. So the first condition, where it was just having a recommending using AI, it inspired new thinking, which we were surprised about, but that's one of the benefits. Whereas where they had to make the plan for their action and then get the feedback, that helped the novices become more systematic and aware of their reasoning. So there are different pros and cons of using these different types of tools. So finally, as we're in a VR conference on the metaverse, I thought I would talk a bit about the research we've done using VR to externalize our thinking. So those two use cases were for scaffolding and extending, so externalizing. And what we've been trying to do is to think about how you can get people to externalize their reflection through using VR and voice. And this is part of some research that I've done through being elected, or I became the Chair of Excellence at the University of Bremen. I don't know if you know in Germany, but Bremen has this system in place where they invite professors from universities in perhaps better known universities, let's put it like that, to come over and spend 4 or 5 years and help them build up a research group. And I was given money to hire PhD students and postdocs and to travel to have workshops and so on. And so the PhD students, and I worked with professors there, were very much interested in well-being and with the technology VR. So that's how I got into this type of research. So the first work we did, this was Nadine Wagner, who was at the time a PhD student at University of Bremen, was to think about how we might use VR as a tool. And she developed which was called Mood Worlds. And the idea here was it was a preliminary study to get people to express their emotions. And so this is the Mood World prototype, which is built on open brush. Oops, here we go. And here it's, you select objects and backgrounds and various tools to paint in a 3D world. And some of you might have used this before, but you can, instead of in 2D, it's in 3D. And you can have backgrounds like this, which looks like very much like Alicante. This one looks like Sweden. And you can have different colors. So it provides a way of drawing and expressing yourself in this 3D, quite abstract way. So this initial study was to enable people to visualize their emotions by creating for themselves a virtual environment. And as we showed you with that prototype, it provides drawing tools, backgrounds, and predefined 3D objects. And it was deliberately intended to be open-ended. So we conducted an initial user study with the tool set and asking, what do people think about when they're creating this virtual environment? How do they express themselves? So it was, as I said, an exploratory study. We had 16 participants use the VR tool set to paint scenes, and they were asked to begin with remembering a time when they were happy. So we would just, because we didn't have the ethics to do something a bit more risky, we asked them to get into this happy state and to draw with it. And then we found from this, through interviews afterwards, that it helped them to reflect on how they felt through doing this drawing, and they enabled them to let go of negative feelings, and it had a calming effect. So this is it again. This is someone using it. You can see them using the various brushes, selecting various options. It's quite exploratory, bubbles, but that was the use of it. And here's some quotes from the interviews. I actually thought about whether the mood world somehow made me happier, and yet it seemed to be like that. You could really stand in my work of art in the middle of it and feel it everywhere. So this idea of being in your artwork and walking through it was something quite novel to them. But for some it was quite challenging. They said, at first I don't know what I should draw at all, because conveying emotions in a drawing is in itself hard. Since I can't draw anyway, it wasn't that easy at first. So what about for people who struggle and don't see the point of this. So we followed up this study with developing from mood worlds what's called self-reflect or self-VR reflect. And this is where my framework came into thinking about this, is to provide scaffolding in the VR to help them with the expressing themselves. And this is where we got ethics clearance to do something which was to get people to deconstruct a difficult personal challenge that triggers negative emotions. So, for example, anxiety at work. And this was published a year later at CHI. And here you can see the things that people go through sometimes when anxiety, and it keeps repeating, anger, stress, confusion. It could be something that's happening at work or a personal problem, having an argument with your children or your spouse or any number of these things which keeps people awake at night. And the difficulty is knowing how to prioritize, how to decide what to do. And a lot of overthinking can take place. And it can lead to exhaustion and conflicts and not sleeping well. And this is what's called rumination. So could using this tool help people to get through some of these steps? So we used the same tool, Mood Worlds, but this time we guided participants to explore the virtual environment they were creating. And we added a new feature, which was voice prompts. And the aim here, just a bit like the previous studies with the chatbots and the large language models, was to provide a more structured journey to enable them to reflect on and deal with the challenge. And so rather than just going out there and drawing, this had 3 phases. And in each phase, there were different prompts to help them guide them through this. So the warm-up was things like, now think about the main stages of the challenge from the start to the end. When you ultimately overcame it, how many different stages or steps were there? And this is to help get concrete actions. And then the free flow, which was questions like, or prompts, have you considered how the separate stages might be connected to each other? How could you design these connections? Could they differ? Remember, there's no right or wrong answer. And then the final phase was to rewalk, focus again on the actions and ideas that helped you overcome the challenge. How did you represent these, and how did they tie into the whole process? So these prompts were delivered when requested or when the user was inactive for 30 seconds or more. So findings from this. This was published in CHI this year. If you want the detailed findings, you can have a look at that. But we had 20 participants take part, and it took between 50 minutes and an hour and a half to do. What we found from the interviews is that prompts encouraged the participants to decompose that challenge into smaller steps. And here's some quotes, which was that it helped them confront the different aspects of what was bothering them. It helps a lot of people to be with their thoughts and explore them more because they're cut off and for themselves. It's not just about what you say, but how you say it. It helps you relax. You can actually paint yourself in. I quite like that as a concept, completely all around you and take up different positions. So the value of adding these prompts was the scaffolding. It enabled them to dissect their challenge and see it from multiple perspectives and provide a sense of accomplishment and resolution. And it guided them to externalize their overthinking and anxieties to see them from a different light. So we followed this up, or rather Nadine did, with thinking about how we could do this with couples. So we talked a lot yesterday about social interaction. So could couples use this to overcome disputes and conflicts? So this is where she designed the collaborative VR experience with these other colleagues. And the idea was, again, to use the same tool, but with two of them connected on the same network and using similar types of prompts. So painting, having the prompts, and then having a discussion. So it worked with, first of all, having phase 1, which was individual drawing. So the couples worked in the same room, but they're separated by a wall, and they did their own drawings for the particular conflict that they'd agreed on before. Then there was the discussion phase where the wall came away and they talked together and looked at each other's drawings and then talked about what they were drawing and what aspects of the conflict that they were focusing on. And then they drew together. They had a collaborative drawing where they used the same tool. And from that, they then had the post-study interviews. And some key findings was it helped disentangle their conflicts. In real life, you would not stop or relativize things. Now you're told the complete story, and then it's not going to be changed. There's very much different to discussing a conflict. Yep, I'll be done in 5 minutes. Because you're trying to evade the pressure. So it helped them to disentangle their conflicts and to step forwards and backwards through the drawings. And it enabled them to generate new insights, make participants think about the consequences, and also, as we've heard before, fostered perspective taking to better understand the partner's behaviour during the conflicts. And saying, my partner's not that good in expressing his feelings, and that now he can explain it better, it's detailed, it's more organised. So, to summarise, what I've talked about today are different ways in which we can design AI tools and VR tools to help people to reflect, to make better decisions, to be more systematic in their problem solving. But all of these require more cognitive effort, which goes against the grain of a lot of the current development for AI tools. And I think that sometimes making this effort can be more beneficial for people, but clearly there are some situations where it's quite good to reduce the cognitive effort. So what's next in the metaverse? So in the call, Mel talked about how we can think about the metaverse in interacting with life-sized virtual representations of AI agents. And I've talked about how we can embed AI tools in VR to potentially extend the sense of immersion and presence. So what if we could combine these ideas together so we could somehow guide and scaffold people to take different perspectives and points of view when interacting with AI avatars that can be life-size, but also some of these VR tools and maybe AI tools. So Mel and myself got together and talked very briefly, and we're in the process of planning a collaborative project. And I know several of you here have also had this wonderful experience of being invited to collaborate with Mel. So we're talking about thinking of a new form of assessment for students to replace the Gen AI essays. As I said, 98% of students now just use Gen AI in various forms and guises to write their essays. So it's not really assessing the students, it's assessing their ability to use these tools. Our suggestion is, well, what other kinds of assessment might we use? And the oral exam is something that has been around for many years, but tends to be used only for language learning. And so our idea is that perhaps we could ask students to take an oral exam where they can't have any Gen AI around them. But that would terrify most students because they have this terrible fear of public speaking. And so our idea is to provide VR training so that students go into this virtual environment and have avatars, and they start with a really simple task of presenting a topic and build their way up, and they're asked really simple questions, and then eventually they'll be asked more complex questions. And we can design the environment to have one person or more than one person. They can have them themselves as well. So this is where it gets interesting, is to think about what would be in this virtual environment and how could it encourage students to learn this skill of public speaking or presenting on a topic and then answering questions, and also to get feedback from the AI. And so that might be the VR with a formal examination where the student sits there and there's the professor there, or three professors. We don't know which one is an AI avatar and which might be real, but that's for the design of the experiment to take place. And it doesn't always have to be formal. It could be fun. I don't know if any of you've seen the Holobox, but we could get the students present themselves in this kind of holographic way as a form of part of the training. So I think the future is bright. I think there's lots of opportunities for us to think about new forms of assessment which require cognitive effort from the students, but it might require some effort from us as researchers, but also from professors to think about how to assess students and also to get them prepared for the future. And I think on that note, I will finish, because that's my 5 minutes up, and say thank you to all my colleagues.
Okay, thanks a lot, Yvonne, for a fantastic talk. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions. Okay, I will start here, but I've seen you at the back.
Hi, thanks for such an inspiring talk. I wanted to ask you about the last two projects, the mood worlds and the one for couples, because we are working on kind of a similar experience in multi-user collaborative environments for people with eating disorders to practice in groups about express their feelings, express how a specific emotion would look like, or a specific, for example, dysregulation situation would look like rumination, as you mentioned. And we were thinking in these environments to have the therapist as one of the participants to guide the experience. But based on what you showed here, what do you think could be the role of a chatbot or an LLM together with the therapist, or how could they combine perhaps their experience or provide different angles, or how could they help each other, for example?
The answer to that is, I don't know, with combining them. We will focus very much, my research is very much on designing tools, and it's only now that I'm thinking about combining tools and avatars together. But I think the question is to make sure that it's not too complex, too much going on. So we heard yesterday about having an avatar, having a real therapist, and having the real person, and who do you focus on? So it would really need to be guided and scaffolded as to where their attention goes from one to another. I should also point out that this was, it's very much in the area of well-being, and so it's not in terms of more mental health issues, where that really does need some, expertise for having the therapist. But I think the best thing is to ask the therapist what kinds of tools that they use themselves in their existing practice. So art therapy is quite, which this was based on, is quite, a common technique that's used. And so asking them as to whether or not that would be useful. But I think what we don't want is to have overcomplicated environments such that they get confused rather than it helps guide them through.
I thank you for the talk, Julia from Helsinki. I was intrigued by the last system, the mood world. You characterize your attempt to use AI to increase immersion and presence, but for me, of course, it was much more, because this kind of environment helps you to, like you also explained, to reflect maybe on what you're feeling and externalize some of this. And so I'm kind of interested to see in the first version there was no prompting and LLM, and in the other version there was. So what did it add? So it seemed that it was very successful to use a bit of generative AI probably to facilitate this process of self-reflection. And so I'm very interested to look at how the LLM was in the end had a positive impact in respect to the original objectives, to have people reflect and help in externalizing things.
I think it's a good point that in the first studies, we just scripted our chatbots, and then we used a large language model because we were interested in it being dynamic and being able to provide real-time feedback. In this one, we started off with just using the VR paint toolbox set, and then added that because we've seen the benefit of having prompts and scripts. So you could just script it, or you could use the large language model. I think there's to train it and to use it sparsely is key rather than to let it dominate. And I think that was what we were trying to do, was that was based on the comment that it's all very well for some people, but there are those who need some scaffolding, and it was targeted at those that need the scaffolding. And then as you delve more into more deeper challenges or mental well-being challenges, that's when you might need more of that kind of scaffolding to help you through it, because you could kind of, get yourself a bit lost in it. So the actual large language model wasn't the focus of that study. It was very much a means to an end to provide the prompts.
Okay, I think we've got time for one last quick question, if we have one.
Hi, thank you for the talk. It's not about VR, but it's about prompting. Do you think we should teach students to prompt, or it's lost war already and they just need to interact with AI whatever the way?
No, I think they should teach us because they're much more savvy. They've been using it in all sorts of ways, and it's something that comes naturally to them. In the same way in which, when Google came along with search, we didn't have to teach people how to use that, and now the general public use it in very effective ways. I think for specific kinds of tasks, particularly if you're trying to generate a design or a video or something, then understanding how to do the detailed prompts can be more effective. You don't have to do more. But iterating is very powerful. So if you don't get it right first time, you can think, well, why is it that the output isn't in anywhere near to what I was hoping? That helps you to then think about, well, perhaps if I write the prompt this way, it might help. So you could train people to write prompts, but you could also get them to discover for themselves.
Because there was a little experiment in France recently, and there was a little experiment, and the students are, if they were allowed to cheat at an exam, and that was not really an exam, so the teacher said yes, and he thought they would use ChatGPT to answer the questions, but instead they just took a photo of the exam sheet, and the answer was already there.
Yeah. So. Well, students are ingenious and savvy, and they'll do whatever they can. And sometimes they're very creative in how they solve these problems that we're rather. Yeah, I think we need to get them, equipped and learn skills for the future. It's like getting them to do their times table. We don't need to do that. And the same with search. They develop new skills. And I think the same with prompting. I think in the future there will be new kinds of multimodal interfaces where prompting is less important. We'll have different ways by which we'll interact with the LLMs. We'll also have physical AI. There's all sorts of exciting developments where we're not just got the text box to put things in. So, and the students will be the first to tell us how to use them.
Okay, on that, I think another massive thank you to Yvonne.